Welcome, listeners of Illusion to Temporal Discussion, the episode-by-episode Nightmare Retrospective podcast. I am one half of the Gestalt entity known as the Two Night Martins, Martin Harder.
And I am the disordered part of the Gestalt split personality, Martin O'Doney.
And today we have a very special guest with us in the form of the brilliant neuroscientist and psychology lecturer, Dr. Bianca Hatton.
Hi there, thanks for having me today. Lecturer in psychology here at University of the West of Scotland.
This should be a particularly interesting episode, not just because we're hoping that Bianca will be able to give us a better insight as to what goes through a Dungeoneer's brain when they answer a riddle with the word leopard. Insert laughter there, by the way. But also because Bianca has never seen an episode of Nightmare before now, so it's going to be intriguing to hear the opinion of somebody who's entirely new to the series.
Today we're looking at episode 6 of series 2. This episode was first broadcast on October the 10th, 1988. Our number one movie at the UK box office was Good Morning Vietnam! And our number one single was Whitney Houston's One Moment in Time. I did try to find the Canadian number ones, but I couldn't find them, unfortunately.
Probably for the best.
Do I have a high opinion of your own music industry? You gave the world the joy of...
Celine Dion.
You've exhausted my list.
There's bound to be some good bands, but yeah.
I think it's more just that you're crowded out by the Americans being made into the South. I don't think there's anything wrong with Canadian music from what I've heard of it. It's just, you just don't get enough exposure.
And now time turns, the recording light burns, time out is gone, the podcast is on.
Welcome back to the time of heroes, the age of adventure. Now heroes from your time can meet the challenge of nightmare. I, Tregard, Guardian and Dungeon Master, bid you welcome. One quest through my dungeon is even now in progress, so here's a progress report. From Oxfordshire came Mark and men. There seemed no way of stopping them, and though dark Mogdred tried and tried, their bravery could not be denied. Onwards they pressed, quite undismayed, their quest to free a dungeon maid. Chased by wights, they journeyed deep, and then a dragon put to sleep, till finally they cast a spell. And all was over, all was well. Winners they were, the very first to make the dungeon come off worse. But now the dungeon turns again to take on 4 young Kentish men. For Tony and his gallant pals must face the perils now themselves. Will they succeed? Well, watch and learn. For time will tell, and time will turn.
So we've got the Dungeon Ditty, first of all, and I make it 2 virtual rhymes this time.
Yeah, I think you can argue there's loads of them in there.
I'm being generous.
I'm going to give them a pass on this one. Dismayed rhyming with made is a bit of a cop-out, but it just about works. I don't think that was a bad one.
And we rejoin the team mid-riddle in the level 1 clue room. The items on the table are a bottle of ground bat's wings, a bar of silver, a fish with a red tint to its scales, and most likely a herring, and an apple. We already know from last week that they have answered incorrectly, and now we learn that the answer the wall monster is looking for is Scotsman.
But name me now the kilted hordes who take the field and fight in clans.
Army.
Falsehood. Scotsmen were the truth I sought.
Scotland did not invent tartan plaid until the
16th
century, so there is no way the war monster could ever have heard of a kilt. It's very, very ambiguous exactly what universe this is happening in, so it could be that they can see into the future. But
it's the pineapple paradox again, isn't it?
It is.
How did a pineapple end up on a table in the Middle Ages?
How did Scotsmen in the 13th century wind up with a kilt? Well, it's obviously because Scotland is a temperate zone, and the kilts were being brought in by birds from Greece, which is where they had them originally. So, coconuts.
Well, Bianca actually lives in Scotland, so maybe she can give us a clearer picture.
Yeah, I've been in Scotland for 2.5 years now. I've finally been able to determine or distinguish the accent, but in terms of the history of Scotland, I have a long way to go. I am aware that the kilt, is relatively recent in the grand scheme of things, as the tartans, as you mentioned. But temporal zone. I mean, I don't know if the sun. Do we really have a sun here? Are we actually on Earth? I couldn't tell you. it's phased all the time.
I lived in Glasgow for about 8 years, and I probably fewer than 100 days in all that time wasn't covered in black clouds. So I do sympathise.
Because we're joining midway through the clue room, this time we only have one riddle.
Spill the salt and earn bad luck. What action clears the matter up?
Left hand over your right shoulder.
Now, I do have an issue with this answer. First of all, the Dungeoneer doesn't say what you do with your left hand over your right shoulder. What he should have said was you throw the salt over your shoulder. One of the advisors does say throw the salt, but Tony doesn't mention it at all in his answer. And secondly, I've always been taught that the salt should be thrown over your left shoulder.
Yeah, can I add in here? Yes, the left side in particular. And this is something that I'm always interested in because part of my background and passion in science comes in distinction between left and right. And as part of that journey, so if you look at Da Vinci's painting, The Last Supper, you'll notice that Judas is knocking over the table salt with his left elbow. And because Judas in the Bible betrayed Jesus, people began associating salt with lies and disloyalty. And in Christian beliefs, the devil hangs around behind your left shoulder. And so if you spill salt, the devil is seeing it as an invitation to step in and do evil. So if you throw the salt over your left shoulder, you're blinding him and rendering him helpless. And I love this association with left and evil.
In Latin, the word sinistra actually means left, and that's where we get the word sinister from.
Yeah, dextrals and sinistrals. I believe the word left itself comes from Old English lift, which is, I can't remember precisely the definition, but it's along the line of like sinister, evil, that sort of thing. Are either of you left-handed?
No, we're well-behaved boys. Well, I'm right-handed anyway.
My wife is left-handed.
Ah, okay, yeah, I'm right-handed as well. But whenever I talk to my students about handedness and I mention the historical baggage that comes with the evilness of left-handedness, I still get students who are like new to the university, 18 years old, telling me that when they were raised, they were told not to use their left hand because that's the devil's hand, that's the bad hand. And we sure, okay, you hear about your grandparents being told to do that, but it's still happening.
Yes, my wife was telling me that she had to learn to use her right hand for a lot of things.
Well, and it's unavoidable in a lot of ways because we are in a right-handed world.
There are some practical things where you simply have to because everything's set up to be right-handed. The reality is the world should be more flexible because it can be.
I was actually just at a talk where we were looking at handedness, and there's different ways that you can define handedness. So maybe you would think about it on the rise because we are expanding the way we think about left-handedness versus just non-right-handedness. It's not that someone is either purely left-handed and they use their left hand for everything, or purely right-handed and you use your right hand for everything. But there's some people who may switch up their hands or who may prefer one hand for one task, another hand for another task, and those we may refer to as more mixed-handed or inconsistent-handed.
I think another thing which when we talk about the world being predominantly right-handed, it's probably somewhat true, but I also think we have to remember because left-handed was associated with being evil, a lot of people probably wouldn't admit to being left-handed down the centuries. So of course that exaggerates the degree to which the stats suggest everyone's right-handed.
Our best estimates, according to science right now, are 10.6% of the population are left-handed. If you include non-right-handedness, I'm not sure what the stats would be. But of course, there do seem to be, like you're picking up on, some potential cultural differences that may come from some cultures still more heavily pushing against left-handedness and the acceptability of using your left hand.
See, I love it when this happens. I can get so much material out of a riddle about salt.
That's because you've got intellectuals on your team, my dear boy.
2 is the score. The team are told that they must find the maid to learn their quest and that the fish is off today. The team advised Tony to take the silver, which they are still mistaking for a snuff box.
Whiskey?
And the bat's wings. The apple, of course, goes in the knapsack. Now, this is going to be a bit of a surprise to Bianca because this bit's not in her script. But we've often talked about how the riddles in the show range from insultingly easy to infuriatingly difficult. So with that in mind, we're going to play a little game with Bianca today, a game that we're calling Riddle Me This. It's time for Riddle Me This, and here's your host, Martin Harder. Bianca, we're going to ask you 5 riddles that have appeared in Nightmare at some point during its 8-series run. We'd like to answer as many as you can, but before you can start, you must challenge us by calling I challenge.
I challenge.
You had the opportunity to refuse there, Bianca. I'm sorry, Bianca. You had the opportunity to refuse. You've declined it. You must challenge now. You could have said no.
Oh, well, I'm up for a challenge. I challenge Martin O'Doney.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'll ask the first one then. This one was from one of the Weeping Doors in season 4, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So I'm going to do it. I'm going to try and talk in a quavering, morose voice. Gallstones are found on the shore of Galway Bay. True or false?
That was really good.
Gallstones. That's weird. False?
Truth accepted. I'm actually quite good at parodying the voices on that.
That is yeah. Okay. Does that mean I've got to try and do my Cedric voice now?
I think so. You're good at the Cedric voice.
I'm not sure I can do the shouting voice. I can't quite do his quieter voice.
Where falls the blow that harms you not, yet ends the state of common man?
Can you repeat that, please?
Should I do it in
Once and once only.
I'll do it in my normal voice. Where falls the blow that harms you not, yet ends the state of common man?
It doesn't help that you're from North America, because this is very much an aristocratic thing.
I genuinely have no idea what to make of this and what it's even asking me.
Where do you get hit without getting hurt, but it ends your condition as a commoner, so to speak? Does that help?
Yes. But I'm sure once I hear the answer, I'm going to feel a bit silly.
Remember, these riddles had to be answered by 10-year-olds.
Yeah, this one is not fair.
Yeah, this one is
no.
was a bit unfair.
We'll just say brain, because the brain has no nerve endings, but it will kill you if you...
Falsehood. On the shoulder is the answer. The sword dub of knighthood.
Oh!
You say this is a commoner, but it doesn't harm you. So,
okay.
that is not fair on 10-year-olds, is it?
No.
Poor 10-year-olds. This episode is the very first episode and pretty much the only episode I've ever seen. Not realizing that they had come in and had already done some stuff previously until I watched the preceding episode after this episode. That first riddle too, with the clansmen, and they said army, and maybe it's the accent I had difficulties understanding, but I was surprised. And I was worried for the poor children that the whole show was going to be complicated riddles.
It pretty much was in series 1.
Only about 78%. Not all of it. There were too many riddles in season 1, I think. I think that's fair to say.
They did go some way to sorting it out in series 2.
It's more when they're obscurely worded, and I think that's the thing we're highlighting with this particular one. Where falls the blow that harms you not? You have to have your brain tuned into a very medieval way of speaking to be able to follow that. And I'm not really sure it's fair to expect kids to be able to do that yet. This is, I think this was actually might have been from the same episode, this one. A prince of Islam on his day held all of Christendom at bay. To Moorish hordes he was Salah ad-Din. But how today do we name him?
Can I ask, what does Moorish mean?
Well,
is this a UK?
The
Sorry?
Moors were a warrior race in the Middle East, basically.
Oh, okay. I was thinking Moorish, like...
Oh, no. What do you mean, but no.
Are we talking about zombies here? What's going on?
Do you want to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Okay. A prince of Islam on his day held all of Christendom at bay. To Moorish hordes he was Salah ad-Din. But how today do we name him? It's more a general knowledge question.
Malcolm.
Malcolm. That's an interesting name to find for anybody living in the Middle East during the Crusades. It is a question about the Crusades. I should stress that at this point. The answer is actually Saladin. It really is mainly a question whether or not you've heard of him. I do tend to get very depressed when I realise how many people haven't heard of him. But have you heard of Richard the Lionheart?
No.
To be fair, though, you are a history scholar, so...
Yeah. Basically, there was a mighty king of England who led the Crusades, the Christian Crusades to the Middle East to try and capture Jerusalem around the 12th century. And Saladin was basically his arch enemy. He should be a lot more famous than he is, I think.
So you're saying I was close?
Malcolm, well... How can I put this? No.
The kids didn't get this one right either. To be fair, they didn't say Malcolm though.
What was it they did say again? I can't remember.
I think they just I can't remember either, but it definitely wasn't right.
Oh, they said Mohammed, didn't they?
Yes.
They got it wrong by about 7 centuries.
Richard the Lionheart, the way I always remember it, he's the one played by Sean Connery in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
That's true.
Or if you prefer, he was played by Sir Patrick Stewart in Robin Hood, Men in Tights.
Is that why I like the movie so much?
Ah, right. We found the level, have we? Excellent.
So the next riddle is, on earth I was born, deep fires tempered me, mountains slept on me. My father was younger than I, and a sculptor gave me my face. What am I made of?
Marble?
I'll give it that one. Yeah.
Yes, we'll give you that one. The answer is stone.
But marble is a form of stone. And finally, this one's from season 3. Which is deeper? The ocean or a saucer of water? Stop and think about it.
At first, this feels like very much a trick question. Which is deeper?
Yeah. Is it the ocean or a source of water? Think about it.
Or a... Well, my instinct wants to say ocean, so I'm going to go with the other one.
So you're going to go source of water?
Yes, please.
Falsehoods? What oceans have you ever seen? What size of cutlery and plates are you using? How much tea do you need?
Well, when you have a bottomless glass of water, surely they reach deeper than the Marianas Trench. They fit in the cupboard beautifully.
Oh, okay, right. So we're talking about a particular source of water. It was deliberate double bluff. Put in context, the first 2 riddles he'd asked were ones which had the instinctive answer is actually the wrong one. And then he asked this one as a third one, where the instinctive answer, of course, is very obviously the correct one.
They got it wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here, I thought that maybe you would twist the definition of deep on me to something that I just hadn't thought of, but...
It's purposefully designed to wrong foot you, that riddle.
Where am I?
You're in the room. And there's a scorpion, so... What?
There's a sting in this tale, and it's deadly. Agility is called for.
So anyway, they arrived at the scorpion chamber. Arguably the best use of the chamber normally houses the giant snake, but it doesn't really work until season 3 when flagstones are removed from the front of the fireplace. There's a completely clear path down the right-hand side here. So so they then remove flagstones from the fireplace to force the dungeoneer to walk in a path that does go through the scorpion's reach, and that makes it work a bit better. Here, it's laughably easy to get around it.
Does the scorpion move predictably? Are they able to kind of time?
Well, yeah, it's limited animation. It swings its tail, turns briefly towards the front of the screen, then turns back, swings the tail again. That's really all it can do. You just have to time when the scorpion is facing towards the front. Even if you mistime it, the truth is it only does you a little bit of damage anyway.
It's like a lot of stuff in Nightmare, it's actually more spectacle than anything else. So yeah, the team made very short work of that one.
Where am I?
Hey, Tony.
Tony!
You in a room?
Yeah.
With 5 doors in front of you.
Yeah.
3 of them have got locks on them. One's got some cards on it.
Yeah.
And the other one's got a horse from a chess set on it.
A challenge here, team. It seems you're being challenged to a game of luck. You're a game of skill. The other doors appear to be locked, and of course you have no key. Decide, but decide quickly.
This is the 5-door chamber previously used in Series 1 for the moving keyhole chamber. Thank goodness it's not being used for that here, and we don't have to put up with Casper again for a while longer. 3 of the doors are locked, and the remaining 2 feature a hand of playing cards with the ace of spades uppermost, and a white nice piece from a chess set.
So the team resolved to take the door with the knight and prepare to meet the challenge that awaits them.
So is this sort of almost like a choose your own adventure in this respect, that depending on which door you go through, you'll get a different...
That's the idea. It's a lot more linear in practice than it wants to admit it is. There probably is only one correct way out of most rooms in practice, and you go the other one, you end up getting locked in or blown up or something.
Keep going. Where am I?
Okay, Tony.
Tony!
You're in a room, and there's a chessboard on the floor.
Yeah.
Oh dear, this is not chess as you know it, but combat chess. Remember, Tony, yours is the knight's move, and you must be careful not to step off your own game squares. The trouble here is the enemy bishop is deadly, and you are quite vulnerable. You must move only when it's your move, and you have just seconds to complete it. Safe exit is your target.
This is actually one of my favourite sections because it can get really tense.
I always enjoy the sort of the thinking man's atmosphere, or thinking woman's atmosphere, where the case may be, of combat chess. You definitely feel like you're playing a strategy game here. The dungeoneer is taking up the role of the white knight, and so he moves in the knight's move across this chessboard floor. And ranged against the dungeoneer is the bishop of the Black Monastery, which can only move in the bishop's move, obviously can only move in diagonals. The basic strategy you've got to come up with is a way of getting from the start of the chessboard to the far end, where there's a doorway just inside from the far corner, and you have to use the knight's move to get to there without being intercepted by the bishop. In the cold light of day, as a challenge, it's inherently flawed. As everybody who's ever learned chess will be able to tell you, the king, moving one space at a time, cannot be caught in checkmate, even by a combination of the bishop and the other king. How can the dungeoneer, using the knight's move, which therefore takes it in three or four spaces on every turn, be caught by a bishop on its own? The answer is it can't, unless they make an incredibly stupid move.
I think for me, what would have been the hardest challenge here would have been, well, and throughout most of these rooms, I was impressed with how good they were with their lefts and rights.
There was a team in season 4 from Wales, and it's become one of the most famous catchphrases in Nightmare is, Simon, sidestep to your left. There was this gigantic gap in the floor to his left. It became one of the most notorious end of games in Nightmare history.
Left-right confusion isn't that uncommon, as you see in the kids. But one thing that I think is pretty neat is there's part of our brain, I won't get into too much technical detail here, but if there's damage to the specific part of our parietal lobe, which is sort of in the upper back of our head, it can lead to something called Gerstmann syndrome, where one of the key symptoms of Gerstmann syndrome is right-left confusion, where it's like to the pathological level. So if someone with Gerstmann syndrome was trying to play this game, they would be sending people into the pits all the time.
That actually might explain one or two advisors, unfortunately.
I'm not saying the children have brain damage, but it would add a level of difficulty, certainly.
Now concentrate. The game is on, and it's your move.
Tony begins on square E1, the bishop on B7.
Right then, Tony, take a few steps forward till we say stop. Keep going. Stop. Now a few side steps to your left.
Okay, stop.
That's it, stop there.
Tony moves to D3, and the bishop takes its turn.
Now wait for the bishop's move. He's a cunning devil. Where's he going to land? No.
Oh, God.
No.
Bishop to D5.
Tony, it's a few side steps to your left. That's it. Stop now, step forward. That's it, well done.
Tony moves to B4.
Now the bishop must move again. Now think ahead, team. Where's he likely to land?
Behind us.
No, he can't land there or there because we're taking.
So it must be there. In the same place.
Bishop's moves back to B7, and at this point, Tregard reminds the team that Tony can move backwards if required.
You can move backwards. It's a chess game.
If we come back there,
Come back to
stay
there.
there.
Tony, take one step backwards.
I do.
That's it. Now a few steps to your right, side steps to your right. Keep going. Keep going. Now step backwards again. That's it.
Stop.
Team move Tony back to D3.
Now where will he move? Keep thinking ahead. Where's he going to land?
In an unexpected move, the bishop moves to C6. The team are carefully plotting their next move.
There. We can go there. Yeah, there. Tony, take a few steps forward till we say stop.
This.
Stop. Now side step to your left. That's it, well done.
Tony is now at c5, right in front of the bishop. This is actually a clever move. Right next to the bishop, right in front of the bishop, horizontally or vertically, is paradoxically always the safest space on the board.
Us at square c5 is the only place they are safe because they are protected by Sir Clive Sinclair.
Now, how are you going to get out? Plan that.
Do you have to get the right number to get through the door?
Yes.
Tony now has 2 possible moves that will position him in the right place to escape, but the bishop blocks one of them.
No, I would go there. Then. Tony, side steps to your left until we say stop, please. Keep going. Thank you. Now walk. Step forward. Well done. And again, just a little bit.
Now, can you get out of the door with the knight's move?
Tony moves to a6 and the bishop to c6, leaving Tony with clear move to the exit.
Okay. Tony, side step to your right.
No, don't bang into the bishop. Forward
No,
one.
no.
There.
No, you won't. Tony, side step to your right. Now walk forward.
God, that was exciting.
Woo! You willikers.
Where am I? Okay, Tony, you in a room with an arch above you and a door straight in front in the centre of the wall, and there's a table with...
Caution team, food here, but guess who's coming to dinner?
Maybe a giant.
Maybe a giant's going to come and eat this chicken.
A giant with a very easily satisfied appetite.
It'll be a very small giant. Oh, it'll be the giant from the first series that was only ever filmed from above and thus looked really, really small.
So it was an optical illusion. He was just a lot nearer the camera than the Dungeoneer.
The team guide Tony to the table, upon which is a whole roast chicken, and advise him to put the food in his knapsack. But the second Tony picks it up...
Stop. Watch it, Tony.
Yeah, so you get the lasers coming out of the lion's head that is just above the door.
The lasers come out, they shoot bits of the floor away, and the kids are understandably getting a bit stressed here.
No, don't step backwards.
Tony,
Turn
come
the
round,
table, other side of the
side
table.
step to your right.
We were wondering, Bianca, if you could tell us a bit about what happens in the brain where stress is involved.
That's a big and good question. I won't get into too much technical detail because I give an 1.5-hour lecture specifically about what happens when we're doing stress. Fun fact, there are 2 different stress responses that we have. There's a fast stress response and a slow stress response. The fast stress response, you might have heard of fight or flight. So our sympathetic nervous system is activated and it really gets us ready. Technically, there's 4 Fs: fight, flight, flee, and fornicate. And so during this fast stress response, we have a rush of adrenaline that's being released through our adrenal glands, which are right above our kidney. And this adrenaline rush increases your sweating, increases your heart rate, your blood pressure. It's basically immobilizing you to run away or freeze in place or fight or whatever you need to do to survive. The slow stress response is a bit slower because there's a release of hormones from the brain that need to go through the bloodstream that eventually also reach the adrenal glands. But instead, it stimulates a different part and it releases cortisol. So instead of adrenaline, we have cortisol. And it takes about 20 minutes for cortisol to peak. So that's why it's a slow stress response. And cortisol is more enabling us to maintain steady supplies of blood sugar. So if you are experiencing a stressful event for a period of time, cortisol will help you kind of cope with that. Helps control swelling after injury. Also, our immune system is suppressed when this happens. What else can I tell you? I guess, so short-term stress can be good for us. You know, it gets you motivation to act, to escape from the potential giant that wants your chicken.
That's an extremely specific situation.
Who knows?
Does it not do that in any other situation? Only when a giant is trying to steal your chicken?
Yes, pretty much.
All right, okay.
An exception is if there's also a dinosaur jumping out at a bush from behind you.
I want to hear you use the giant example in one of your lectures now.
Hey, if my students know what this is, then maybe it'll go. Otherwise, they'll just think I've gone a little bonkers. But this is why long-term stress can be really bad, and it can have health consequences because it's reducing your immune system functioning. You can get sick more easily. Your wounds heal slower if you are under a lot of stress for a really long period of time, especially during childhood. Like if you have a neglectful or bad childhood, it can actually change your brain. There's parts of your brain that may become a little bit smaller. There's a part called the hippocampus, which is really important for memory. And so hopefully these children aren't undergoing a lot of long-term stress. It's just short bursts that's getting them ready to deal with what they need to deal with.
And they do deal with it really well.
I noticed there's some very intelligent maneuvering by the team here. The temptation when the shot started coming down would have been just to carry on guiding him around the back of the table and then turn him around. Instead, they do the sensible thing, which is they bring him back round the table so they can keep an eye on where his feet are, and therefore they can see whether or not he's about to step on one of the gaps in the flagstones.
I was quite impressed with this team of kids, especially in contrast to when I jumped back an episode, and a lot of time they were saying like, "Come on, go, go, go," and without giving nice, precise instructions. And I liked this team of kids. I thought they did well.
They're one of the youngest teams in season 2, so perhaps inevitably it didn't turn out too well for them. Spoiler alert! But they did show signs of real potential given their age.
So as we say, despite the amount of urgency, the team keep their head and guide Tony through the exit. And my God, the relief on their faces when they finally do.
Run forward. That was like this. Where am I? Okay, Tony, you're in a room that's a mixture of cave walls and wooden walls, and there's a pot in the middle, with a fire beneath it, and there's looks like an old lady, perhaps a witch.
Dratted little dungeoneers! Interfering tattlepot!
Do you want to do this bit? Because I know Mildred's one of your favourites.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so not only do we have the presence of the awesome Mary Miller, aka Mildred, in this scene, we also have everybody's least favourite preschool teacher, Gretel. You trapped me into doing that one, didn't you? You cunning swine.
I think it evens itself out.
Yeah, it does, I suppose. Gretel tells the Dungeoneer that Mildred was going to make her an everlasting beauty spell.
Did you notice Mildred mocking her in the background as well?
Oh, relentlessly. Yeah, I don't really blame her. I can't tell if that's Mildred mocking Gretel or it's Mary Miller making fun of Audrey Gretchen. I get the impression that Mildred saying, "I get to play these powerful sorceress or this incredibly evil witch." There's you playing somebody from Play School. So as you may have been teasing Audrey Jenkinson there. One observation I made, by the way, I reckon I counted this morning. I think Gretel's dress would have caught fire at least 4 times during the scene.
Yes.
Audrey Jenkinson was twirling around. It kept on passing through the fire under the cauldron.
Maybe they have excellent fireproof materials.
They must do. They've got excellent health and safety standards in 13th century English dungeons.
They do. And I do love it when they misjudge where they are on the actual background. My favourite example is definitely last episode when Traegar clearly walked off a cliff.
Yes. At the end of the winning quest, you can see very clearly he's about to step over the side as he's...
Yeah. I do love the backgrounds though. David Rowe is an amazingly talented artist.
Tremendous perspective ability that he's got. It's not only beautifully artistically, but it's also beautiful mathematically. Every aspect of perspective is done right down to the millimetre.
I know David Rowe from Nightmare, and I was mentioning him in conversation with someone else recently who didn't really know Nightmare but suddenly recognized the name as the artist who did the cover for the game James Pond 2 Operation Robocod.
I do actually dimly remember that, believe it or not. It's a bit of a throwback. I don't think I ever played it, but I did see it on sale a few times, and I think in the early 1990s, I think it was.
I think it's been released on almost every generation of computers and games consoles since its original release.
Mildred was going to make me an everlasting beauty spell. And I promised to help her if she would. Trouble is, she hasn't got any frog's eyes. Have you got some, Tony?
Tony!
Have you?
No.
You, Tony!
What have you got then, boy?
Ground bat's wings.
Ground bat's wings?
Mildred says that although she can't use the bat's wings for the beauty spells, she'll keep them anyway as they may come in useful.
I'm going to say it. I absolutely hate Gretel's role in this part of the scene.
I absolutely hate Gretel's role in anything.
Yeah, true. But I think it's some of her absolute worst moments here. I don't like saying it because I am aware that Audrey Jenkinson has had some mental health issues in the decades since. So I'm cautious about criticizing her, but
we're not really criticizing the actress. We're criticizing the character and the writing of the character because it's such a two-dimensional character.
What Mildred is saying is she'll keep them in ways they can come in useful. What can you make then, Mildred? Why are you even asking that? She just said she's going to keep them.
Yeah.
She didn't say she's going to use them now, but then suddenly she does. I'm not even sure exactly what I'm criticizing here, actually, but...
Do these characters all show up in basically every run?
They show up in some and not in others. Mildred is played by Mary Miller. There's also a sorceress called Lilith, and they sort of take turns.
Yeah, tend to alternate between quests, don't they?
Yeah. And there's Folly the Jester. He appears in quite a few quests, but again, not all of them. Probably for the best. There's a fair old mixture, but I think they were trying to vary it up a bit to make sure that it doesn't get stale, because they had a very, very limited cast of characters in the first season, and it gets stale, to be perfectly honest.
Well, what can you make then, Mildred? You just said it. You just said it. I can make a well spell with bat's wing. Mildred, are you sure? 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 Course I'm sure, flippity-gibbet.
We got Gretel making a huge big deal about making a well. She sounds really excited about the fact that when Mildred announces that she can create a deep, dark well. Why do you care? You don't want a well. You want her to make you permanently beautiful. How is creating a well going to help you with that?
The mystery of what could be in the well perhaps is enticing.
We know very well by this point that the wellway just means the entrance to the next level. Maybe it could have been a magic well that... when you drink from it, it makes you live longer. I don't know.
Well, a few Dungeoneers do check first, don't they, if there's anything in the well.
The last Dungeoneer of season 1 actually held his nose before going down.
Well, for all he knows, it's a Lazarus pit.
Yeah, it could be. That would explain Tregard's appearance improving over the series.
Well, no. He definitely gets older. I think his dress sense probably improves.
Wing of bat and toadstool spell. Conjure up a deep, dark well.
Again, Mildred transforms her cauldron into the wellway to level 2. Before they can move, Tregard reminds the team that the maid may have information for them.
Why does it have to be Gretel who tells them what the quest is? Why didn't the war monster just tell them in the first place? Does it really make any difference?
I think they were just trying to mix things up a bit, maybe.
It just seems a rather pointless way of doing it.
Tony! Ask the maid about our quest. Do you know anything about our quest?
A quest, you say?
Yes.
Yes, I do know something about your quest. Your quest is for the crown, but you may not wear it. Also, you are to have a spell, and it's called down. Now, come on, into the silly well you go, because we've got really important things to do. It's not beauty she needs, it's a brain!
So the team get given the spell down, and then they head into the well.
Where am I? Okay, Tony, looks like you're inside a kind of creature's mouth or something. Yeah.
Oh dear, Mildred's fooled you. She hasn't sent you to level 2. She sent you into a monster stomach instead. Now you better do something fast, for the gruesome business of digestion has begun.
After being practically thrown down the well by Gretel, Tony emerges inside the monster's stomach. In a rare case of a team carrying spells between levels, the team use magic to escape.
Spell casting. D-O-W-N.
And my wife and I were sitting here watching this last night, and we just cringed because the implications of what actually happens here, it does not bear thinking about.
One thing I was wondering about, though, besides that, is Okay, so the rucksack that they're carrying that's full of food, is that something that all children have for every puzzle, or could they unload the food into the stomach?
The knapsack acts as a sort of surrogate stomach, so any food they put in there basically disappears. It feeds their life force, which is like their energy bar.
You see that computer generated face that with a hand, and it sort of comes. That's their life force clock, basically. When the background is green, they're healthy. When it's amber, it's not so healthy, and when it's red, it's critical. To keep it topped up, they have to get food occasionally. They put it in the knapsack, and the knapsack sort of eats it for them.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense.
I'm not sure it really does actually think about it.
Well,
that's when you just don't stop and think about it. You just go with it.
Where am I? You're in a room with a door straight in front of you, on your right, and there's a table and a block just beside it.
Okay. Tony.
Unusual, team. Most unusual. Generally, the portals of level 2 are guarded. Examine objects with care, although the food seems real enough.
After escaping the monster's stomach via means it's best not to discuss, Tony finds himself in the familiar surroundings of Cedric's chamber. Conspicuous in his absence, though, is Cedric himself. The team guide Tony to the table, upon which are a pie and a flagon. When the pie is in the knapsack, Traegard asks the team if they think the flagon is empty or full.
Should I look in it? Yeah, take off the lid and pour it out onto the table.
Something cold!
Put it down. Put it down.
Put it down. Turn to your left.
So we get a ghost image of Merlin, basically. I just want to say I always snigger when Tony has to repeat his name because he sounds really irritated.
Speak, spirit! Who are you?
Answer him.
Tony.
You're very distant, very faint. Call louder. Tony! You, Tony!
Anyway, as soon as Tony removes the flagon's lid, we get this faint image of Merlin. You can't hear him at all. You ask Tony what he seeks, and Tony replies that he's searching for a crown. And then we get one of the worst puns in the history of Nightmare.
Oh, this really won't do. I'm not carrying on long conversations on spirit level. It's far too tiresome.
On spirit level... This is a very strange scene, isn't it?
It is.
Nightmare is often strange, but this is strangely different from Nightmare.
Yeah, it's out of place.
I'm not sure what the quest gains from having it in there at all.
Maybe Lawrence Webber just wanted a day off.
Could be.
Maybe had some dentistry to do.
Okay, but it's not as if Merlin does any riddles or anything, is it? It just seems to have been pasted in just to give John Woodnut something to do.
And this exit from the room is a bit odd for them as well, because it's the only real instance we've seen of them not being great at maneuvering, and it's just simply exiting a room. They seem to zigzag him out.
Yes, it therefore prolongs a scene that already feels unnecessary.
So to me, everything was new and unusual, and I didn't have any particular thoughts on whether it fit or not. I was wondering what he meant by like discover me in rocks or whatever it was that he said.
I think that's a druid reference. People sometimes think of Merlin as the last of the druids. The pagan mythology often sees life in water, in rocks, in plants. It sees gods and spirits in all of them.
For me, anything that I didn't understand, I had just assumed was another clue that could potentially be used down the line.
It's most likely that had they survived, they would have worked out the meaning of what he said.
Maybe. It just sounded like sorcery babble to me.
Where am I? Okay, Tony, you're in a room with some steps in front of you and a clue objects on a table.
It's the level 2 clue room, being used in probably the best way it will ever be used in the entire series.
Almost certainly. Once again, we always say of this clue room, it's a beauty of a room, this level 2 clue room. It's always the best one for having a haunting, and it's got a haunting, and it's a haunting that has a lot of information to give us.
It is possibly the best haunting, and it's the first time we're seeing it here. But before we address that, let's just congratulate the team on figuring out that sending a blindfolded kid down a stairway without using a banister is probably a bad idea.
Are there some instances where the Dungeoneer has fallen down the stairs?
We think so. We're not absolutely sure, but we think that there's been some retakes done.
So now, for the first time, we are introduced to one of the most genuinely unsettling entities in Nightmare's entire run, the Oracle of Confusion. This unnerving yet not unfriendly entity takes the form of an ethereal face with a feminine appearance, uttering words that are inaudible.
This character is actually a unique one in Nightmare because it's one that ended up being played by two different actresses. It's played by Audrey Jenkinson, the aforementioned Gretel, in this scene. But Jenkinson wasn't in season 3, but the character was retained. And so Zoe Loftin, who played Melisandre in season 3, she ended up playing the Oracle of Confusion as well. It's the only example, to the best of my memory, of an actual recast. The Oracle of Confusion doesn't appear to be aware of anything around it. It's got all this jumble of information in its head, and it just keeps on muttering it non-stop. But it doesn't appear to be speaking to Tony particularly.
So I'm wondering, because obviously this thing is quite unnerving, I think you'll agree. But I'm wondering if there is like a difference in the brain between being unnerved by something and actually being scared by something, because it does feel like a different thing.
Perhaps there's some element of fear to being unnerved. So I would say feeling unnerved would be a much more complex emotion than just the basic fear emotion. And we can certainly distinguish between like these basic emotions like fear are emotions that we see worldwide, cross-culturally. They're expressed in the same way. The bodily responses are the same. But when you get to more complex secondary emotions like feeling unnerved, or there's some sort of uncanny valley and just not feeling quite settled, there's a lot of like variability, and perhaps, well, you'll see a lot of cultural differences in how people will react when they're feeling unnerved, for example. But in terms of how that reflects in the brain, I imagine we would see some overlap with fear, but perhaps some other basic emotions might combine together to produce this. So I'm not sure if we could speculate what those would be.
I think curiosity has to be one of them, doesn't it?
That's a really good point. When you're experiencing fear, not only do you have those stress responses that I was talking about, but there's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is really primary for our fear response. And when you're feeling unsettled, you're probably relying a lot more on what the front part of your brain, which is more higher cognition, thinking, planning, assessing what's going on around you. So maybe that might be one difference.
I would say from my own experiences of outright fear, when you're full of fear, you don't really want to know anything about it at all. You just want to get away from it. When you're unnerved, you may just dare to step a bit closer and look a bit more closely. So I'd say that's where being unnerved works completely differently from being outright afraid.
I'd agree. Yeah, it's something I'd never thought about before, honestly, other than the very broad generalizations between primary and secondary, or like simple and complex emotions.
So the team guide Tony to the altar, on which are a selection of clue objects, a block of soap, a scroll, and a gauntlet. After a full 35.77 seconds, and yes, I timed it down to the millisecond, Tregard decides it just might be a good idea to make a passing mention to the giant floating goat's head.
Goat's head?
Yeah, shall I say that again?
That is really mean to Audrey Jenkinson. Take it back. Goat's head.
Tregard decides that Tregard decides that it just might be a good idea to make a passing mention to the giant floating ghost head.
He says that I'm offensive. I mean, honestly, this is the grief I get, Bianca, from this charlatan here.
Caution, team. Present here is the Oracle of Confusion. It knows much, but there is no order to its knowledge. It is sometimes best not to question it. But then again, who knows? Tony, if you wish to hear its voice, merely shut your eyes tightly and raise the helmet of justice. But do not open your eyes. It could be very dangerous.
Time is coming that was past. Dread Mog who causes all disruption. Soap will cleanse, but not the spirit. Accept the challenge. Take the word, but do not read it. All action is opposed. The way out is also the way back. The cure for disruption is unity. The time is coming. The time is coming.
Replace the helmet, Tony. You've heard enough.
So what can we really surmise from the Oracle's clues?
There are bits of genuine babble in what the Oracle is saying. And unfortunately, it's possible, therefore, to mistake genuinely useful bits of information for babble as well. And I'm afraid that's actually what the team has done here. But it is a very, very subtle clue that's sort of hidden away in there. When the Oracle says, accept the challenge, the traditional way of saying that in medieval fiction is take up the gauntlet, and there is a gauntlet on the table, so it's actually giving you the instruction, you've got to take the gauntlet with you.
I did not pick up on that whatsoever. There was a lot of information, like you said. As a total noob to this, I had just assumed that everything was relevant, and I could not follow along. There was a lot of information that she spouted out.
Yeah, the idea of the Oracle is the Oracle knows all, but doesn't have any context, so it will just spout out random information, some of it useful, some of it not. The soap will cleanse but not the spirit, which is where they came across with that. I think they heard the word soap and then assumed that was what they needed to take. It's an easy mistake to make.
Yeah, I do rather wonder whether this team could be seen as a bit unlucky.
Well, I don't think it's unlucky because the clue was definitely
in their
there.
position. If I was only about 10 or 11 years old, I think I'd have probably made the same mistake. Maybe a team in their mid-teens or just a little bit earlier, you could expect better from them, but I think they were a bit unlucky here with that one.
The advisors tell Tony to pick up the soap and the scroll and then guide him out. Bianca, do you want to do this bit?
Do I need to do your silly...
Silly?
Like, you can't do it any less than he did.
Okay, Tony has entered the Vale of Mogdred. The challenge here is that there's a piece of the crown under the bridge, and Tony has to literally lie on his stomach and reach down in order to get it. Tony can only just reach it, and when he does manage to collect it...
That's it, have you got the clip? Oh, he's got it. Right, now if you bring your arm back up onto the bridge now, and put the items one in each
Beware,
hand.
team. Beware the mindless threat of the mechanical warrior.
The first appearance of the automaton.
An early example of techno-sorcery before the techno-sorcerer actually joined the cast. It's played by Edmund Dane. You could almost see it fitting in an episode of Bagpuss.
What's your name?
Sorry?
What is your name?
Did somebody just say something?
Okay, that was me. I was trying to go back to the episode and try to contextualize this for myself. I remember the noises. Did he actually show up?
Yes, very briefly.
Okay.
It's basically a kind of gigantic wind-up toy that chases the Dungeoneer, but is moving so slowly and so stiltedly that it's not really that difficult for the Dungeoneer to get away from it.
No, it's just really added for a bit of tension.
It can be impressively relentless, though, so as soon as you hear the sound, it does become a bit unnerving.
It's an example of a hurry-up mechanic.
I find hurry-up mechanics to be perhaps the most stressful for me. Do you guys ever play Bubble Bobble?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you remember that terrifying white ghost thing that would chase you? And then he would have the red eye. He gave me nightmares.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you're alone there.
That is appropriate nightmares.
What?
We do actually get skull hauntings quite similar in their way. In Nightmare, they get away from the automaton easily enough.
Where am I? Okay, Tony, you're on a kind of wheel with another one diagonally in front of you.
Team, these are the Mills of Doom. Another mechanical threat if ever I saw one. Only the centers of each cog are safe. Don't delay now. Life force energy fading.
I still love the Mills of Doom.
I think the name of them does sound a little bit too much like a 1970s Doctor Who title.
The team's manoeuvring skills have been pretty good this far. Aside for that one awkward exit a few chambers ago. And despite some slightly unnecessary jumping here and there, they do make quick work of this puzzle.
They're not a bad team. They're not a bad team. I've seen worse teams get further.
Do you think, though, that our opinion on this team may be at least partly based on the fact we're still kind of basking in the warm afterglow of a winning quest?
Yeah, I'd actually thought, I suppose it depends on who the beholder is, but I'd have thought if anything, it would have the opposite effect.
That's true, yeah.
What do you think, Bianca?
Yeah, having that context, that's a good point. For me, I didn't have that context, and I was impressed with them. And in fact, when I went back and watched the previous winning team in the previous episode, I was actually more impressed with this team, even though the other team won.
There you go. In fact, quite the opposite then. We genuinely have got an uncluttered perspective when we say this team are pretty good. Bianca was watching them in isolation to still come to the same conclusion. I think that is a pretty good sign.
Where am I? Okay, Tony, you're in a room with 4 doors and a skeleton.
Onto the catacomb bite.
Hey!
Yay!
My favourite monster.
Bianca, what was your immediate thought when you saw this monster?
My first thought, okay, it made me think of Terraria. I don't know if any of you have played Terraria, but there's a dungeon that you enter and there's a skeleton, but he actually has a torso. So my first thoughts were of Terraria, and then my second thought was, where's his torso? Is he okay? But I know that as a kid, I would have found him scary.
Yeah.
And his twitching, his movement seemed unpredictable. So like trying to think of it from a kid's perspective.
The movements after a while become predictable, but there's moments of where the head suddenly jerks around. Before you picked up the pattern, it can actually be quite startling.
That flash of red in its eyes that you see.
Definitely.
Is there any sort of background about why he exists and where he came from?
Yes. According to the first Nightmare novel, originally, before Tragar became the dungeon master, the castle, Nightmare Castle, was ruled by a sorceress called the Gruagach. And the Gruagach, amongst other things, had a power to give life to spellbound dead objects. He'd created the Nightmare Challenge to sort of kill off the bravest and the best of English warriors. When he killed one of them on a whim, he decided to use the bones of that warrior and sort of warp them and reconnect them, and created this strange 4-legged bony monster, and he called it the Catacomb Bite.
The poor creature.
It's quite interesting when you kind of get into it and you realize there's this really deep lore behind this kids game show.
Dire warning, team. Catacomb bites, if handled at all, must be handled with kid gloves. Here, you needed the gauntlet to subdue this monster. It was the challenge you were told to accept, but of course you declined it. And now you must find what exit you may, and hurry. Life force energy critical.
If it wasn't obvious before that the team were now in a losing state, this kind of really cements it, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so. When it becomes clear that they didn't have the right object, yes, there's still a doorway they can leave through, but you know it's the wrong path. If you look closely behind the Catacomb Bite, you can actually see there's 2 more doors behind them. It's usually the inside left door is supposed to be the one that you go through to leave the chamber. Sometimes you go through the side doors instead. On this occasion, it's pretty obvious that the side door that's available does not go onto the right path.
Where am I? Okay, Tony, you're in a room with 3 doors and they've all got portcullises in them.
Welcome to one of Mogred's little playpens, Dungeoneer. Play a while. Play forever.
Oh dear. Well, never mind. I suppose even Mogred's got to have some fun.
Unsurprisingly, the team have met their end. It's nice that the production team didn't resort to another bomb room death this time, and even nicer that we get a gleefully menacing appearance from Mogdred in his first kill scene.
There's a few things to discuss here. Firstly, they're in the same room they were in just a moment ago. The Catacomb Bite chamber is also the variant 4-door chamber.
Yes.
The question is, do we really credit Mogdred with this kill? Do we really?
Their life force was critically low.
Yeah, and they were locked in and there was nowhere for them to turn. It's very, very scary because the Mogdred's laugh over the final seconds of it, I ran to the toilet almost as soon as the program was over when I was a kid.
I still love Mogdred here, especially his kind of pompousness. And love his line, "Welcome to one of Mogdred's playpens. Play a while, play forever." Because it riffs directly on an old Commodore 64 game called Impossible Mission.
Another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.
And that really kind of calls back to Nightmare's roots, where it was based on ZX Spectrum games such as Dragon Talk and Attic Attack.
And Rogue.
And Rogue, yes.
I didn't know that was actually a deliberate mangled quote.
Well, I'm assuming it is. I think it's too close to the actual quote for it to be unintentional.
I would agree. You got to still hand it to John Woodnut. That laugh at the end. Oh my God.
He always seems to have a lot more fun playing Mogdred than he does playing Merlin.
It's always more fun to play the bad guy.
You're out, I'm afraid, team. So let's get you all safely out of the dungeon. Spellcasting. DISMISS.
Traegard dismisses the team in the usual manner. And we said this before, but I'm going to repeat it again for Bianca's benefit. This is an important part of the show because they show that the kids are actually still alive. And that's more important than a lot of people give it credit for, because there were some problems at the beginning, weren't there, Martin?
I don't know if you've heard the name Mary Whitehouse. She was very, very prominent in the 70s and 80s.
Can I just say, Mary Whitehouse was to kids' television in Britain what Jack Thompson was to violent video games in America.
I was thinking more along the lines of the Comics Code Authority in America.
Yes, that's good. Yeah,
campaigners who have an entirely arbitrary standard about what's acceptable and what isn't. But she was quite prominent attacking TV. She spent a lot of her time attacking Doctor Who. And then when Nightmare started in the late 1980s, she's not entirely to blame for this. I must make this clear. She's not entirely to blame for the controversy she created. A member of the press came up to her and basically said, they've got this new program on kids' TV where they're showing kids getting sent into a dungeon and getting slaughtered and getting violently killed. What do you think of that? She initially reacted very badly to it, but she then finally got to watch an episode of it, and she saw the way they were very, very careful to emphasize when the Dungeoneer was killed off that he or she does live on in reality outside the dungeon. And when she saw that, she said, actually, no, this has been done very responsibly, no problem. And she sent an apology.
Oh, good for her.
As I've said many times before, I do not have a high opinion of Mary Whitehouse, but I do give her credit for being able to say she was sorry.
Round the Bend came out and she had something else to moan about instead.
That got in the way as well, didn't it? Yes.
Farewell, Tony, Craig, Dean, and Tony. Yours was a brave bid, but now others are keen to challenge. But first, watchers must wait, and dungeon must pause till time turns once more. Join us again soon for Nightmare. And remember, life's not worth a candle without adventure.
This is unusual for an episode to actually end at this point, isn't it?
Yes, it's very rare that a quest ends right as the episode is running out of time.
If it's not something that they do on the regular, why would they specifically want to do it for this one?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
On the subject of nightmares, I understand that we don't really know a great deal about what causes dreams, but what do we know?
Yeah, nightmares are very, very common in childhood and completely normal, and they tend to abate as we get older. We still occasionally have nightmares. Like you said, we don't know a whole lot. I can tell you that different kinds of dreams can happen in different kinds of sleep. So when you fall asleep, you go through sleep stages, and if you have like a Fitbit or something, it might be able to tell you, here's when you were sleeping deeply, here's when you were sleeping more light, here's when you were in REM sleep. And so REM, rapid eye movement sleep, is stereotypically when you think that you're dreaming or maybe having nightmares. And we know that that kind of sleep's really important for memory consolidation. So you're kind of taking the day's events, and your brain is embedding the stuff that you learned in the day or that you did in the day in your brain, so that it's making it more permanently there. And so as you're sort of revisiting, and as your brain is revisiting and reactivating the stuff that you went through and that you thought and that you felt, that tends to be thought of what comes through in our dream imagery, in our dreamscape. And I'm not sure why it would be different, if that might explain like why kids have nightmares more so than adults. New things can be scary, and everything is new when you're a kid compared to an adult. But then when you're more in a deep sleep, so this is where you go through, you have 4 stages of sleep, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and each one is progressively deeper, and stage 4 sleep is your deepest, and you can have dreams in stage 4 sleep I think usually those are more everyday, like I wrote an essay, I did a math test, just regular, rather than fantastical dreamscapes that you may get during REM sleep. But there is a disorder of if you're what's it called, when you're not when you jump into a nightmare state from deep sleep, sometimes you can get um, night terrors. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Night terrors. And I don't know if any of you have experienced this before. I have a friend who has. With the night terrors, they'll wake up and scream or cry or but otherwise be completely oblivious to the world around them. So a friend of mine who has night terrors, he'll wake up and start screaming, and then his wife will come and try and calm him. But there's nothing you can do in the moment because they are not awake, but they're still getting these terrors. So that's a whole other form of nightmare, and oftentimes they won't remember that happening. So it's like a waking nightmare, but you're not awake and you don't remember it happening. But the rest of your family sure remembers because you scared the dickens out of them. Anyway, I rambled a lot about dreams, and I don't really know if I got to the core of the question of why do nightmares happen and what's happening, and we still have a lot to learn.
I think we're a bit closer to understanding it after that, yeah.
So we don't really know how we can lessen the chance of having bad dreams then.
Well, you can practice good sleep hygiene. That is a thing. So this is something that whenever I talk about sleep in classes, I try to end by talking about good sleep hygiene. And a lot of this you'll be familiar with. Don't use electronics in your bed for perhaps like 2 hours before you go to bed. Phones now have a night mode that you can enable, and it'll turn the screen yellow and get rid of the blue wavelengths. And it's the blue wavelengths that signal to a certain part of your brain that, hey, it's daytime, wake up, do things, but you don't want that when you're going to sleep. So limit, the amount of blue light you're getting. Try not to drink caffeine, that sort of thing before bed. That's an obvious one. Respect your bedroom and keep it for sleep only. Make it a safe space and a comfortable space. Don't do work in your bed. Don't eat in your bed. Keep it as your sanctuary, your comfortable sanctuary. So things like that, establishing a good routine. And also, if you're experiencing a lot of stress in your day-to-day life, again, your brain is encoding that when you're sleeping. And the more stress you have, the more likely that's to come out in your dreams and perhaps manifest as a nightmare. So try and reduce stress in your life if you can.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Before we go today, we have a comment from Patreon supporter David N. Rabbit, and I'd like to address it here, if I may. This isn't the whole comment, this is just part of it. I honestly haven't remembered the riddles being so vital to progress in the quest. I think they must have got a lot softer in Series 4+, which I'm more familiar with. It's been a while since I saw them, but I don't remember anyone having trouble with the weeping doors. I may remember a couple of places where they're just given points for effort and allowed to carry on despite complete failure. It does of course make sense that you should be set back quite harshly for only getting one right, but I don't think it should be a complete dead end. All right, maybe if you say leopard. Were they thinking of caveman fighting mammoths in leopard skin? I completely agree. I don't remember the punishments for getting one riddle wrong being so harsh either. At least not in levels 1 and 2.
In first 2 seasons, it wasn't that harsh. It was in season 3 when it became a lot more difficult to get away with getting riddles wrong. It is true that it got softer again after season 4. A lot of the time riddles were actually phased out to an extent. They realized that it was starting to slow quests down quite a bit sometimes, and it wasn't a particularly plausible substitute for battle. One way of bypassing it is they got rid of alternative exits. An awful lot of locations that you're in later seasons, there's only one exit out of them, so you don't need a clue after a riddle to know which way to go. I'm not sure that I've ever really taken to that style. I've always felt that it became less and less interactive as a result of these changes, but David N's memory is correct if he feels that later series were a bit softer about it. They were. Riddles were not essential to things. They were brought back a bit when the Brolican appeared in season 7, which is a kind of war monster.
As much as I like the Brolican, I have issues with the Brolican. The Brolican was a creature who had all of its knowledge taken away from it by the big bad. So he would ask the Dungeoneer questions, but several times in the series it became obvious that the Dungeoneer could just say anything because the Brolican didn't know any better.
By definition, the question master you always want to be quizzed by is the one who doesn't know anything. I don't think anybody could ever quite understand what they were trying to do by introducing the Brolican into the story.
So anyway, what do you think of this team?
I think they're unlucky. They are as good at manoeuvring as anybody else we've seen in season 2.
Probably better.
Not a great deal of general knowledge has to be said, but then they're young, so that they're at an age when they're not likely to have too much general. They were good enough to get to level 3. And they were unlucky that they missed a clue that was really quite hidden.
Well, kind of echoing in my very limited experience, I enjoyed watching the team. I think generally they seem to work well together, and this was really just a first run through of a whole new thing for me. And I honestly, it took me down a backlog of trying to figure out, like, how did they even do this technologically speaking in the 80s. But I digress. As a whole, I really enjoyed it. This is the kind of show I would have adored as a kid. I would have wanted to be on this show as a kid. And do either of you know anybody who's gone on there? And like, how did you get on the show? Is it just like any game show?
It was an auditioning process. Process tightened over the years as they mastered the art of filtering out the really, really, really bad contestants.
We are in contact with a few of the former Dungeoneers and advisors. So do you think you'll go back and watch some of the earlier episodes maybe?
I might. I was actually just speaking with some friends of mine from here in Scotland and asking if they'd seen it as a kid, and the one was a resounding, "Oh yes, I love it. I love this show. I always wanted to be on it."
Right, so that's the end of this episode of Nightmare, and that's the end of our episode of what's our podcast called? Right, so that's the end of this episode of Nightmare, and that's the end of this episode of Temporal Discussion. Bianca, do you have anything you want to plug?
If you want to learn more about brain, and you know how we were talking about laterality, or I mean left versus right, if you want more of that in your life, you can follow me on Twitter. It's just at Bianca Hatton.
And if you like the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter. We're at Nightmare Pod. If you really like the podcast, you can give us money on Patreon, patreon.com/nightmarepod. We now have a website, which is nightmarepod.co.uk, or you can email us on podcast@nightmarepod.co.uk. And don't worry, if you sent an email to the old address, we're still picking it up. So we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And in the meantime, don't have nightmares.
Just watch them instead.
On it!